Hello, my name is Michael Stolberger. I'm Director of Property and Environmental Resources for Blue Earth County. I'm also the County Elections Administrator. This is another one of our recap and review videos for our election judges who have completed in-person election judge training, or for anyone else interested in learning more about the election day roles and responsibilities of our judges. It is important to note that this training is not a replacement to that in-person training. If you would like to serve as an election judge in future elections, please sign up on our website and we will include you in additional in-person training that we plan on conducting before the November general election. This video will focus on election day activities and conduct. These are the activities that election judges will be helping voters complete on election day, and it also provides some additional information on who else is allowed in the polling place during election day and the conduct that we expect of everyone in the polling place. Voters are of course there to cast their ballot, and they can do that on their own or with any amount of assistance that they request. Voters can have anyone provide assistance in the polling place except for an agent of their employer or an agent of a union representing that voter. As the election judge, you will ask the voter if they are looking for assistance from an individual, and then you'll ask that person providing assistance whether or not they're an agent of the employer or an agent of a union representing that voter. We do not need to know the relationship to the voter. We do not need to know what level of assistance is being provided. We just have to make certain that that person providing assistance is not an employer or an agent of the union. Again, the voter gets to decide who's providing assistance and at what level. At that point, it is up to the voter and the assistants to work through that process. Minnesota law was also updated to say that people providing assistance can do that for an unlimited number of voters, provided that the voter is asking for that assistance. Somebody cannot stay in your polling place on election day offering to provide assistance to voters. It is the voter who is asking for assistance and bringing someone into the polling place to provide them with that assistance. In some instances, the election judge may also be providing assistance. Remember that you're only going to help as much as requested, and you'll never make assumptions about the needs voters may or may not have. Don't forget that party balance is required for some tasks when you're providing assistance, and that includes marking ballots. Election judges may also help with what's called curbside voting. Curbside voting is where a voter who cannot or wishes not to enter the polling place is able to complete their voting process from their car in your parking lot. Curbside voting is available to any voter who wishes to participate in that process. Election judges cannot ask reasons why, and election judges cannot qualify or disqualify anyone from the curbside voting process. Curbside voting processes are time-consuming, and as election judges, we need to make sure that that's not interfering with access to the polling place for all other voters. What we mean by that is we should only have one team of curbside voting judges go out at any one time, and if there are more than one curbside voters waiting, unfortunately they will just have to queue and wait in line until that curbside voting pair is able to help them. The curbside voting process again involves two election judges. They will bring a curbside voting kit out to the vehicle. That kit will give instructions for the process. It'll include tools and resources that you need, and it'll also include other items that you need to bring to the voter. Some of those other items include a poll pad so that we can check in and identify the voter or help them register on election day. And it'll also include a blank ballot for your precinct. That is obviously what the voter needs to complete in order for their vote to be counted by our tabulator. After the voter has been checked in on the poll pad or registered on the poll pad, and after they have completed an oath for curbside voting, which allows the judges to feed a ballot into the tabulator, the judges will provide the voter with a ballot so that they can vote at whatever level of independence they want. In some instances, they may ask the election judges to help them cast their ballot by filling in the ovals, or ask them to review their ballot to make sure that it was completed correctly. After the ballot has been voted by the voter, the ballot is brought back into the polling place with all the other materials from the curbside kit and the poll pad. The election judges will return the poll pad to the poll pad judge. At that point, a receipt can be printed out. That receipt will already have been signed by the voter since they signed electronically on the poll pad device, and that will create the voter's certificate that the poll pad judge will keep, and will also print out the ballot receipt. The two election judges will bring the ballot receipt to the ballot judge. The ballot judge keeps the ballot receipt in exchange for the ballot that the voter has already voted, and at that point then that voted ballot can be brought to the tabulator, where it will be fed into the tabulator and counted as indicated by the voter. It is important to remember that the voter should not leave the curbside parking spot until given the all clear after the ballot has been cast into the tabulator. If for some reason that ballot cannot be counted, that would be an abandoned ballot if the voter leaves prior to successful completion. So one of the last steps will be an election judge returning to the car or the greeter judge waving from the entryway that the voter is all clear and can leave the polling place. Voters should be able to vote as independently as they wish, and so as election judges, we want you to help make sure that your polling place is as accessible for every voter at every level. Give all voters the same options when you're explaining opportunities to provide assistance, or when you're talking about our Express Vote assisted voting device, or any of the other ways that voters can have assistance in the polling place. We also want to make sure that you're aware that there is a language line available. Your head judge will have a phone number to call if voters need interpretation or translation services on election day. I'll also point out that the county has some age awareness training available on our website. We'll give you a link to those resources at the end of this video. If you do provide assistance to a voter in terms of casting a vote for a voter on their ballot, or if you learn any disability or other information about a voter that is private data, it is critical as an election judge that you maintain the privacy of that information and never reveal a voter's vote or challenge a voter based on their perceived cognitive abilities. Let's next talk about a prohibited activity that is not allowed in your polling places. Campaigning is not allowed during voting hours in the polling place, within 100 feet of the polling place room, or on any public property of the polling place. For example, we have voters who vote on the Minnesota State University Mankato campus. We use the Taylor Center as one of our polling places. There is no campaigning in the Taylor Center. There is no campaigning within 100 feet of the polling place room in the Taylor Center. And there is no campaigning on the entire public property of the university campus on election day because it is contiguous to a polling place on their property. Campaigning is allowed, however, on any private property regardless of the distance from a polling place. For example, if you have a polling place that has more than 100 feet of parking lot space, but there is a house right next door to it on one side of an alley, for example, campaigning can occur on that private property. There's nothing we can do to prohibit that or eliminate that. That is a private property matter, and if voters have any concerns with what's occurring there or whether or not people are allowed to be campaigning, that is a matter that would need to be brought up with that private property owner directly. The only exception to that rule is if there is obstructions or intimidation of voter occurring through that campaigning on private property, then we can discuss that more and potentially bring in law enforcement to address those issues. The general rule on campaigning is to remember that it is not allowed during voting hours, in the polling place, within 100 feet of the polling place, on public property. Now let's talk a little bit more about what it means to campaign in the polling place. Now that we've covered where campaigning can and cannot occur in the polling place and near the polling place, let's actually talk more about campaigning itself. The prohibition on campaigning includes any campaign materials or speech, and that is specific to the ballot in your polling place on that election day. Prohibited campaigning covers candidates, political parties, and ballot questions. The prohibition for candidates and campaigning in the polling place covers their name, likeness, logo, or slogan. And those same sort of prohibitions cover the parties representing the candidates on the ballot. No political party names, logos, or slogans can be included or discussed in the polling place or be present on campaign materials in the polling place. Also, if you have ballot questions on your ballot in your polling place, campaigning prohibitions cover the ballot question, the number, the title, the subject, the slogan, or any logos associated with that ballot question. Again, these are specific to your polling place on that election day, so the prohibitions on campaigning, campaign speech, and campaign materials in your polling place will vary between elections, as the candidates, the questions, and the parties represented on those ballots will change between each election. If you do have campaigning occurring in your polling place, as an election judge, it's your obligation to address it. You will want to bring to the voters' attention that they are not allowed to campaign in the polling place, and you'll want to point out what you are considering campaigning, whether or not that's campaign speech or campaign materials that they're wearing or that they're bringing into the polling place. Ask the individual to cover up or remove or return to their vehicles any items that would be considered campaigning, and of course you'll ask them to stop making campaigning speeches in your polling place. If the voter refuses to comply, you'll want to involve your head judge. Your head judge will repeat the request, and it'll also be documented on the incident log. The refusal to comply with this state election law is documented on the incident log so that it can be followed up for prosecution and investigation as appropriate. The head judge will inform the voter of this consequence of their behavior. However, we want to make sure that the voter is also aware that they are still entitled to vote. If the voter still refuses to comply, we encourage our head judges and judges to not make a bigger deal out of this instance and help the voter vote as quickly as possible. Minimizing the disruption in your polling place in any intimidation or inconvenience this causes other voters is critical. Again, we remind the voter that they're not complying with the law, we document it on the incident log, but we still allow that individual to vote. There are other prohibited conduct that you may be experiencing on election day, and we want our judges to be familiar with that. For example, unauthorized persons cannot linger in the polling place or within 100 feet of the building. We'll talk more about authorized persons on the next slide. You should also be aware that intoxicated persons or liquor products are not allowed in the polling place. Also, disorderly conduct must be addressed immediately. If someone is acting in a disorderly fashion, we need to give them warning and let them know that if they continue to act in a disorderly fashion, law enforcement will be called to have them removed from the polling place. Smoking, including vaping, is not allowed in the polling place, regardless of any building signage or permissions. That is a state law. Firearms and guns do follow the building's rules and signage. If signs are posted prohibiting firearms and guns, no one is allowed to bring in a firearm into the polling place unless they are a licensed law enforcement official being asked to respond to an emergency. Election judges, however, are not allowed to carry firearms and guns in their service as an election judge, regardless of what the building's requirements are and regardless of any permit statuses for election judges. Well, there is no law in Minnesota that expressly prohibits voters from bringing phones into the polling places. Election judges need to make sure that voters cannot and do not record or make lists of voters in the polling place or interfere or obstruct the voting process. While a voter may use their phone to look at a sample ballot or review information that they brought in as part of their research for election day use, we cannot restrict that unless it rises to the level of obstructing or interfering with other voters, or if they're using their devices in the polling place to record other voters or attempt to make lists of who's in the polling place. Your head judge will help you work through those scenarios, as will the county office if it's an issue. We'll also point out on this slide that the prohibition on phones also applies to our election judges and also is at a higher level. You are not allowed to use your phone to make lists or interfere with the voting process, of course, but we also require you to keep your phones out of your immediate possession on election day. They are not allowed to be out while you're in the polling place. You can access your phones on breaks or in the hallways or outside of the voting room if necessary throughout election day. As was mentioned previously, only authorized people can be in your polling place on election day. Voters are obviously allowed in the polling place if they're directly engaged in the voting process, and that includes anyone they're bringing with them to participate in that voting process. Assistants, children, or vouchers, for example. Of course, election judges who are certified, trained, and appointed and on the roster for election judges in the polling place are allowed to be there, along with other elections officials. There are a series of authorized persons that can be pre-authorized to be in the polling place. And then there are a series of individuals who can be allowed in the polling place if they meet credentialing and identification requirements. We'll talk about the media, exit poll interviewers, and challengers on the next slide. It's important to know that there is no provision in Minnesota law to allow poll watchers or poll observers into the polling place on election day. No one can present themselves to the polling place on election day claiming to be a poll watcher or a poll observer in Minnesota. They are not allowed to be in the polling place. Members of the media are among the class of individuals who are authorized to be in the polling place on election day. They must present identification and credentials to the head judge when they arrive, and then they are allowed to observe the voting process by maintaining a 6-foot distance from voters. They must also refrain from conversing from voters while voters are voting, and also are not allowed to interfere with the voting process. They cannot make lists of voters, and if they are wishing to interview a voter, they'll likely do that outside of your polling place room, so either in the entryway or in the parking lot, after the voter has cast their ballot. Voters can choose whether or not to participate in that process. It is important for everyone to know that members of the media can take audio, video, and photos within reason in the polling place, as long as they are not creating lists or disclosing private information. As an election judge, if you wish not to give your consent to a member of the media in recording you or asking you questions, you are entitled to do that. That is your personal choice to make. We may also have exit poll interviewers present in the polling place. These individuals are allowed to conduct anonymous surveys of voters after they have voted and as they are exiting your polling place. They are not allowed in your voting room. They will be in the entryways or just immediately outside the entry of your polling place, depending on the setup for your location. They must present identification and credentials to the head judge when they arrive, and then they must not interfere with the voting process. This is entirely voluntary for voters, and exit poll interviewers cannot require or force voters to participate. They are only allowed to approach a voter and ask them to participate as they are leaving the polling place. Challengers may also be present on election day. Challengers must be appointed by the major political parties in the state of Minnesota, so that's either the Republican Party and/or the Democratic Farmer-Labor Party, or they may be appointed by an individual candidate if that candidate is not a member of the major political party. Lastly, you may also have challengers who are representing ballot questions. In all instances, the challenger must present an authorization letter or document and photo identification proving their identity. Your head judge will work through this credentialing process. As an election judge, it is important that you do not allow anyone else to be in your polling place as an observer or a watcher. Only challengers are allowed during election day, and your head judge will ensure that challengers are appropriately credentialed. Challengers have a very limited role in Minnesota. They are there to challenge a voter's individual eligibility to vote based on personal knowledge that that challenger has of that voter's eligibility. Again, that is a very high bar. They must have personal knowledge of a voter's ineligibility to vote. If they do have that personal knowledge, they will complete what's called an oath of challenge form, where they will document that eligibility concern that they have. Challengers are not allowed to converse with voters. They are not allowed to make lists of who voted. They are not allowed to see private voter information. Challengers are not allowed to have their phones or computers out in your polling place voting room, and they are also not allowed to handle election materials. Again, they are there only to challenge an individual voter's eligibility to vote based on personal knowledge that challenger has. If a challenger is making a challenge in the polling place, they will complete that oath of challenge form and provide it to the head judge or election judge. At that point, the election judge takes over and works with the voter to review the challenge, and the voter agrees to an oath as they work through the challenge process. The voter will determine whether or not they are eligible to vote or not vote based on information provided in the challenge and any information that the judges can provide. If there are any questions about the challenge process, if a challenge is actually occurring in your polling place, please call the elections office and we will help you through that process. An important reminder here is that it is up to the voter to review the challenge and either agree with it or override it. The voter makes those choices. The voter should know that if they refuse to participate in the challenge process, or they are not able to successfully override the challenge, they are not eligible to vote in that election on that election day. There are some other behaviors that election judges must watch for in the polling place, as they are prohibited. Again, no one can stay or linger in the polling place to observe it. That role does not exist in Minnesota. No one is allowed to threaten, compel, intimidate, obstruct, or bribe voters, and no one can tear down, deface, or damage elections equipment or supplies or signs. If voters are acting in a disorderly fashion, election judges must give them warning, and after that warning, they can be removed by law enforcement as necessary. We will be providing you with a series of forms for voters to lodge complaints or concerns about Election Day activities. The first form is a feedback form. The feedback form can be provided to any voter who wishes to provide feedback on their experience on Election Day. This can be positive or negative feedback. This is not a form to use if someone is alleging a violation of election or voting laws. This is an opportunity for people to provide customer service tools. As an election judge, if someone needs to register a complaint in order to feel like their voice is being heard, please provide them with the feedback form. If someone is alleging a violation of state election law, we'll want you to use the state election law form. Your head judge will have a copy of this form. This is for an allegation of a state election law violation, such as voter eligibility not being upheld or allowing somebody who's already voted by absentee ballot. Our equipment will not allow that to occur, but if a voter wishes to make an allegation about that, this would be the form to use. The state election law form must be notarized. The voter can take the form with them, get it notarized, and then return it to the polling place, return it to the county office, or return it directly to the county attorney's office. The Have a Complaint form, or Help America Vote Act complaint form, is for an allegation of a federal election law violation. Federal election laws cover our voting equipment and machines, any signage in the polling place, and could also be used for any voter registration law violations that someone wishes to allege. This form must also be notarized, and your head judge also has this available. These can be returned to the polling places, can be returned to the county elections office, or to the county attorney's office directly. Both the state election law form and the Have a Complaint form are significant allegations of election law violations, and it is important that voters know that they must complete the forms in their entirety, including the notarization. Election judges are allowed to serve as notaries in that capacity on Election Day. However, we strongly suggest that if a voter is alleging you are violating an election law, that you do not also notarize the form with that allegation. The voter can take that form elsewhere to have it notarized and then make sure it is returned to the polling place, to the county elections office, or to the county attorney's office. If you'd like additional information about the conduct and activities that can occur in the polling place, please review the Secretary of State's website or review the county's website for election judge training. We have more information and resources available to help election judges and others interested in this part of the Election Day process. Additionally, as a reminder, this video does not replace the in-person training requirement to be certified as an election judge in Blue Earth County. Please visit our website to sign up for that training if you'd like to be included for the November election. And then also visit the websites listed on the screen to get more in-depth information from the Election Judge Guide regarding everything that we've talked about in this video. If you have any additional questions, please contact us at the information provided on the slide. We'd be happy to answer those questions. Thank you.